Hey guys, it's Trop, and today I'll be covering the main aspects of a build fight and how to learn to build smarter instead of focusing on building faster. Just before the video begins, I'd like to let you guys know that I'll be splitting this video into smaller segments to make it more enjoyable to watch, and a full-length video will be uploaded in case you guys want to share it or go watch it all in one go. Keep in mind, most of these clips are old and come before the shotgun changes, so most of the material still applies, but some small bits still may vary. A big problem I see in build fights is players continually race for high ground without realizing they're burning hundreds of materials with little regard for what the other player is doing. When playing like this, these players get absolutely bodied when going up against someone who knows how to control a fight properly. When people continually race for height, they become very good playground warriors, but these skills do not transfer over into scrims, as positioning and damage always triumph over being 3 layers above your opponent. There are 3 main aspects in a build fight: building, positioning, and shooting. Without one or the other, each of these categories becomes significantly weaker. A lot of people complain about shoot downs or turtling, claiming it is cowardly and not the point of build fighting or playgrounds. This is a toxic mindset that leads to no improvements, as turtling, applying pressure, and breakdowns are all part of the real game and should be practiced. This lets you know when you're building too high or have an opportunity to knock your opponent down a few pegs. This game is a shooter first, Minecraft sandbox mode second. It is impossible to outbuild your opponent until they die. In this video, I'll be going over common mistakes with mindset and play that I see a lot of players doing. Overbuilding, predictable play and movement, hesitation, and neglecting to create damage opportunities. Let's first cover overbuilding. This is the most common mistake I see in both public matches, playgrounds, and scrims. These are players that will spam high ground and never take shots. You may think you're above this category, but often you do it without realizing it. Here are a few examples of clear overbuilding. As I roll these clips, I'll explain the main problems with them.
Oh!
If you notice what was wrong, you'll see the player that I was fighting didn't take any opportunity to shoot back. In fact, as soon as they gained the slightest bit of high ground, they opted to build 3 layers higher and barely support their 90s tower. This makes sense if you think the other person will attempt to retake, but in this situation, I am in control of the fight, as I dealt damage. As a result, I have an enemy who can be one-pumped and is not a threat at all. I also have an enemy who gives me a free kill as he is too high to avoid fall damage. In this next clip, I am able to deal significant amounts of damage despite overbuilding and then barely building at all. I assume he's going for a regular retake, but I misjudged and my weak structure is broken down. This isn't a big deal to me, as high ground isn't that important to me. I optimized to prioritize damage over high ground, as I have judged that committing to high ground is not worth the amount of materials and potential to lose health. This decision allows me to maintain control over the fight and deal around 150 damage. As a result, he has lost health and materials in a situation that looks like an easy retake, as I am not overbuilding, yet he is. As a result, he just gives up and dies because high ground is that important to him. As soon as I hit a single shot while he is building for height, I have gained an advantage and he is not. Let's look at an example where both players are not overbuilding and prioritize damage over high ground. Remember, this game is a shooter first and a Minecraft sandbox second. In this clip, I'm fighting against Elo Fortnite, one of my teammates. He consistently performs at a high level and recognizes that overbuilding is a prolonged death sentence. Despite the fact that I hit Elo for more than 110 damage, he isn't afraid to keep the fight in close quarters as he knows I can play low ground very effectively. He knows his best bet is to force a situation where we will either trade shots or tag me when I am not focused on tagging him. I keep track of where Elo is and what buildings he has edit control of, and as a result, I have most of his possible plays mapped out. Unfortunately for him, I also have pieces I have edit control of, and I'm able to sneak a pump shot through my floor to end the fight. I'll be rolling a few clips in the background, and I'll let you as the viewer understand how predictable my opponent's plays were, and why they were flawed, and how I took advantage of a situation where prediction played a major role. Being predictable is a major flaw in build fights, and most people neglect to avoid doing it. When people build fight, they do not care about the mental part of it. They mostly only care about the speed of which they do practice routines. whenever I watch or fight someone who does not focus on building smart, they often overbuild and go through their 90s routines without considering how to block, confuse, and sneak damage in on the other player. This is a short segment, as it is more of a personal responsibility to figure out what your style of mixing up plays is. It is important to know that mixing up your style of play is not doing a different sequence of 90s or shots, but rather forcing your opponent to play differently so that you always have the upper hand. In a 1v1 scenario, Fortnite is a two-player game where both are attempting to win the fight. The main difference between mixing sequences versus mixing maneuvers is that mixing sequences allows the opponent more time to predict what you will do. It is also easier for you to do this, as you will not have to think as much. In a scenario where you're fighting a player who mixes maneuvers rather than mixing sequences, you will get bodied as they move faster than you can process to and react. This is true for all levels of skill, but more so closer to the skillless ceiling. It is important to remember that predictability is a two-way road that applies to both you and your opponent.
Why? Why you do this? Toxic. Oh, toxic. No, that was almost perfect time. No, that was. Yes. You hit me through my ramp that time. I blocked that. Just- Oh my god, my Wahlund place.
A sign of a confident player is a player who can quickly recover from losing an advantage and make plays without hesitating. They do not doubt their movements, and they know all possible outcomes of their decision. It is up to you as a player to run these scenarios through your mind as fast as possible and in the moment to become a player who can fight effectively. Here's some examples of what I am talking about. This is a fairly short clip, but it illustrates how not hesitating has great effects. The main focus of this clip is the lack of hesitation on the edit. I hear my opponent's pickaxe draw out and swing in an attempt to replace my floor. During this time, I know he will be unable to switch back to his shotgun and fire off a shot before I can shoot him and place a wall to block any possible shots. As a result of my lack of hesitation, I've created a scenario where I can take a risk-free shot. There are a lot of things happening in this fairly short clip, so I'm going to slow it down so it's easier for everyone to understand what is happening in the clip. I create opportunities for damage by W-keying my opponent and taking risks in order to trade my advantages for damage. When my opponent ramps over me and exposes us both to potential damage, I place a cone and block as much damage as possible while still being able to take a shot. This works out for me as his pellets collide with the cone, and I score a full body shot. Now I have momentum and follow through with applying pressure. I score another full body shot, and I know my opponent is within one pump range. From here, I fully commit. I know if my opponent decides to wall himself off from down below, I can place a floor and continue the pressure. If he tries to trade shots with me, I can simply trade for a kill. Finally, we will be covering a mistake that comes hand in hand with overbuilding. This mistake is one of the more common ones, as people believe high ground means they will be able to take free shots. This isn't true when your opponent knows that high ground is not the end-all be-all, and low ground is just as effective for peeking and dealing significant amounts of damage. There are multiple ways to create these opportunities. The most effective include blocking and shooting, editing, and abusing small cooldowns to allow for risk-free shots. But as always, when you create damage opportunities, there is always the risk that the opponent will shoot you back. It is your job as a good player to create opportunities that favor you the most. When you gain an advantage, it's like filling up a meter that can be used to trade in for another advantage. Positioning is the end-all be-all advantage, which can be traded in for things like damage, using less materials than your opponent, or simply staying alive. Something I noticed is that players will establish an advantage and simply lose it by not using it to snowball the other player. In this short clip, I establish height and give it away knowing I can transfer it into damage. Many players are so focused on high ground they expect their opponent to attempt to maintain it above everything else, and assume they will never give it up. This is a deadly mistake. A nearly risk-free way to trade in your advantages for damage is to create angles to score it. It matters when and how you decide to use this trick. Within this fight, there are many observable aspects of a well-played build fight. but the main focus is the round-ending shot. During this clip, I trade for damage, time my shots correctly, and as a result, lose very little health. This leads me to knowing my opponent is within one shot range, and I go for a risky double edit play. I know he has his pump shotgun pre-drawn, so I opt to be unpredictable and go for a single floor edit so that I have an angle. If he chooses to fire back, the lip of the floor will most likely block all the pellets. I happen to be lucky and catch him in a moment where he is reloading, securing a risk-free and game-ending shot. In this clip, there are two instances where I could have continued building instead of shooting. I know how fast my opponent can and will build, so I time my shotgun shot and barely sneak a shot through the crack between his floor and stair. I give up the possibility of building up another layer in exchange for 90 damage. I now hold control over the fight as he is within one pump range. I fumble myself and accidentally redeploy, but this isn't a big deal as I can just reposition. I attempt to build up so I can attract my opponent and force an engagement. As soon as I see the red of his build blocking mine, I know he has the potential to edit and shoot down on me. This is why I pre-draw my shotgun so I can shoot before he can. He is lower than I am, so this fight is a 60-40, provided I hit my shots. This works out as I predict the double edit correctly and end the fight without taking any damage. There are a whole lot of aspects that make a good build fighter, and often you have to do one of these correctly to do another. This comes from experience and fighting better players. But there are some common misconceptions and ingrained thoughts that simply hurt you. I've been called toxic for shooting out someone who is overbuilding. I've been called toxic for shooting my shotgun too much. My playstyle has been called toxic because it isn't how playgrounds are supposed to be played. Remember, at the end of the day, grinding playgrounds is useless unless what you have learned can be transferred over to the main game or scrims. It is important to remember that the whole point of fighting is to shoot them until they die, and not until they reach the sky limit. This is especially true in scrims or the new scavenger and alchemist formats where killing someone quickly is rewarded with materials and health. I'm Trop, and I hope you enjoyed my video. I'll be making a segment talking about the building aspect of a fight sometime next week with newer clips. Stay alert and stay tuned for my next video.